My nutsack is made of steel.
Alright folks, welcome back to another video. I'm finally finished with my move, so I have plenty of time to start making videos again. And I got a brand new setup, so let me know what you think about it in the comments. And feel free to drop a like on this video if you like it. So today I am bringing you my top 10 episodes of the Walking Dead mainline TV series. This list was actually a lot harder to make than I thought it was going to be. There are actually so many great episodes of this show, but I was able to narrow it down to 10, so I want to start off with some honorable mentions. Starting out, we got Tell It to the Frogs. Now, Rick's reunion with his family is enough to get it into the honorable mentions spot, but as it was only episode 3 and the show was still finding its footing, I couldn't really put it into the top 10. Next up, we got Season 4, Episode 14, The Grove. An amazing take on the Ben and Billy story from the comics. I do wish Carl was a part of it, but as the show didn't really go into his darker side to begin with, it's not a huge deal, and I think it was portrayed beautifully. Next up, we got Thank You. This episode perfectly captures the fear of running from a zombie horde, and I don't think it gets enough praise. It does have the infamous dumpster scene, but even the scene itself is really awesome for what it is. Next up, we got Season 8, Episode 12, The Key. This episode is heavily slept on. It's the ideal Rick versus Negan fight, and we get to see Rick swing a flaming Lucille. Nothing is cooler. Next up, we got Season 9, Episode 12, Guardians. This is the Whisperer Way of Life introduction episode, and as the Whisperers are my favorite villains from the show, I think it perfectly captures what they're all about, and it introduces Beta, one of the most menacing villains to come out of the show. Next, we got Season 10, Episode 11, Morning Star. This episode belongs in the honorable mentions because of the hilltop fight at the end. It's a great sequence and it's super epic, but it's a bit of a slow episode coming up to that point. But I absolutely adore the shot of Daryl grabbing the Morning Star and approaching the gates of Hilltop. Next, we got Season 11, Episode 9, No Other Way. The Reaper arc was a pretty disappointing arc, but this episode actually makes it worth it. I love Maggie's betrayal at the end. Everything from the cinematography to the score, it all just comes together so well. And lastly, we have Season 11, Episode 10, New Haunts. I never see anyone talk about this episode, but for some reason I have a real soft spot for it. Some people may see it as controversial skipping a month into the Commonwealth already, but I think the fish out of water feeling we get is just absolutely incredible. So that's it for the honorable mentions, so let's officially start the list at number 10, Season 9, Episode 15, The Calm Before. Now, this episode is regarded as one of the best post-Rick era of the show, and for good reason, as it perfectly delivers the Pike moment from the comics. Now, the Whispers into Screams arc is my favorite from the comics as well, go figure, so finally seeing it brought to screen years later was just an absolute dream. The episode itself is on point tone-wise. Ezekiel's speech at the beginning really makes it feel like a community event that everyone is happy to be a part of. And there's a ton of little changes from the comic that just make everything come together so well. Like Alpha scalping those Hilltop residents at the beginning and us getting a little sequence getting to know them before, that gut punch. It's amazing. And as people are going missing, Carol, Daryl, and Michonne all set off to go look for them. And in the middle of the night, they are ambushed by the Whisperers, followed by Beta. Now, this is the first time Daryl sees Beta after pushing him down the elevator shaft, so it's like, oh shit, immediate danger. But Beta surprises us by not immediately killing all of them, and it really reinforces his loyalty to Alpha, and I just think it was a great thing to see. Moving on to the actual Pike moment itself, it is portrayed pretty much perfectly. I only have very minor gripes with it, like the placement of the Pikes I think should be further apart, making it a big border like in the comics, but it's a small thing. But what's interesting is the choice of deaths in it. It was never going to be the exact same in the comics, and I think the choices that they did choose worked really well. I did really like the fake out with Ezekiel, for comic fans, but a part of me kind of wishes that he was a part of the Pike lineup. And I say that because I feel like the show didn't really do anything with his character, and if they were going to have Carol go as far as she did in Season 10, I think, having her lose her entire family would not only, avoid treading the same water with losing a kid, but also make her actions make a little bit more sense. So yeah, number 10 is The Calm Before, an amazing episode, episode 15 of the season, not even the finale, which was a really nice surprise. Moving on to number 9, we got Season 3, Episode 4, Killer Within. This episode is slept on so hard. I've always seen it as one of the most gruesome, besides the lineup episode of course, but one of the most gruesome and heartbreaking episodes of the series, especially early on. Regardless of how you feel about Lori as a character, her death has got to be one of the most emotional we've seen on screen. Something about a mom embracing her child, crying and praying as she knows the end is pretty much here is just some really haunting shit. And on top of that, it's a double death episode. We lose T-Dog as well. It is what it is. I feel like T-Dog could have probably become a pretty cool character later on if they gave him some actual screen time. You know, looking at The Walking Dead Destinies, regardless of how you feel about that game. But yeah, I feel like T-Dog could have probably gone a little bit more, but he goes out a hero and saves Carol, so it's okay. The reveal of the prisoner being the one messing with them is done well for what it is, but it's not as crazy as it is in the comics, obviously. And looking at some of their other plans that they had to, you know, spice up the prisoners, I think might have added quite a bit to the show, but you know, it is what it is. But yeah, Killer Within is an absolute ride front to back. Heartbreaking, terrifying, stressful. It's a work of art. And at number 8, we have season 2, episode 12, Better Angels. Now this is Shane's death episode, and it is written pretty much perfectly front to back. The way Shane's portrayed losing his mind as he stares at Randall, you know, beating his head, pointing a gun at him, John Bernthal just does a fantastic job showing the villainy Shane is capable of. It's all written to make sense, as dumb as Shane's plan is. You know, he's in a state of rage, and he thinks that fear will overtake the group, so any bullshit story he spews up, they're gonna eat up. But this is where we see where Rick has really acclimated to the new world and sees right through his best friend's bullshit. It's really sad to see Rick try to reminisce with Shane and him just be so cold. You can see the light bulb turn on in Rick's head knowing exactly what's happening as they're in the woods. And the reveal of Randall dying from his neck being broken and turning sets up a great mystery that gets paid off in the very same episode. But the highlight of the episode, of course, is the 1v1 versus Shane and Rick. And I don't think there's a more perfect way to shoot it, write it, portray it. I think it's done masterfully. I read somewhere that they wanted Shane's gun to not actually be loaded and for it to basically be, you know, like Shane egging Rick on to put him down on purpose, which I think takes a lot of nuance away from their interaction and would not make sense for Rick's development down the road. So I'm happy they went with what they did. Now, moving on to number 7, we have The Day Will Come When You Won't Be. Now, some of you may be a little surprised to see it this far down, but I personally just cannot get over the fact they split this into 2 episodes. If they had made the season 6 finale one big episode and, you know, trimmed out the 20 minutes of bullshit before we actually see who gets picked, this would have been one of the greatest episodes in TV history. But coming into season 7, it almost feels a little bit gimmicky, you know, especially I was watching it live, you know, week to week since like season 2. So waiting those 7 months and then, you know, the episode premieres and you gotta wait another 20 minutes before, you know, it reveals. It's supposed to build up suspense again, but didn't do the cliffhanger in the first place. You wouldn't have to do that, you know. Plus, I think it just completely kills the momentum of Last Day on Earth, which is in itself a great episode, but it's just completely thrown off by the cliffhanger. Like, honestly, I think it should be studied on how to kill momentum in your show. But seeing it how it was finally actually portrayed once we got to it was pretty much always what I envisioned when I was reading it back in 2012. But ironically, I think having a double death and having Abraham die as well hurts the moment. Not only does, you know, Glenn's death immediately after overshadow Abe, but Abe itself, we didn't need an appetizer, you know. Glenn is a big enough death for it to just be his moment and his moment only. That being said, everything added with Abraham is fantastic. You know, the way Negan chirps them, you know, red will forever be red. It's absolutely fantastic. And having Daryl be the indirect cause of Glenn's death is an interesting writing choice. It puts Daryl into, you know, an interesting place being ridden with guilt for the next half season, but They don't really do much with it. You know, we do get the interaction later with Maggie and him, which is what I was looking for, but overall, I kind of just wish more came out of it. But you can't fault that episode for it. Last thing I want to say about it, the ending scene, all slow-mo as the saviors are piling out, is absolutely perfect. You know, Maggie embracing Carl, we barely see them ever talk, so that just kind of reminds us of how close this group is, even if we don't see it. And Rick saying, you know, he's our family too. It hits hard. It's a great episode brought down by the fact that it's split into two and has its momentum killed. Moving on to number 6, we have season 9, episode 8, Evolution. Holy shit, this episode brings the horror back to The Walking Dead. Whoever had the idea to make the Whisperers introduction in a foggy graveyard needs a raise, because it is done beautifully. And the entire build-up with the mystery of the walkers, it's done so well. And I don't know if it's just me, but it's something about the scene with Daryl, Jesus, and Aaron staring off at the horde milling around. The color grading just pops so much. Something about the sky kind of has like a purple hue to it. I don't know, it always really sticks out to me for some reason. But the last 10 minutes of this episode, holy shit, the momentum is just firing on all cylinders. The only thing I'm not a fan of is Michonne, Yumiko, and Magna, you know, coming out of absolutely nowhere at the graveyard, finding them in the fog. I don't know how that happened, but, you know, it is worth it to get the visual of Michonne standing with them with the sword and everything, so it is what it is. But yeah, an amazing episode capped off with Jesus's death, which a lot of people have issue with, but let's be real, folks. Jesus was never what he was in the comics. Nothing against the actor, but I always felt like Jesus was, you know, a lot older in the comics, like, you know, 40s, maybe even like pushing 50. So the casting choice of Tom Payne kind of didn't really fit, for my opinion at least. That is until this very episode, where we see exactly what Jesus was capable of being and what he should have been from the beginning. A martial arts expert, you know? He should have been flying around. He should have been in All Out War, throwing the grenades back that Negan throws, you know? It's a huge missed opportunity of a character, to be honest. But at the very least, we do get to see at least a little bit of it in the end. So I'm more okay with his death than most other people. And the reveal of the Whispers in the end is a perfect cap-off to the half season. You know, a crazy half season with, you know, Rick and Maggie disappearing, the time skips, and then capping off with a new villainous group. It's a great episode and a great mid-season finale. Moving on to number 5, we have another season 9 episode, episode 5, What Comes After. Now this is Rick's final episode, and I don't think I could have asked for a better send-off for him. It's mysterious, it's nostalgic, it pays homage to the past. It's perfect. The only thing that kind of holds it up, and it wasn't even an issue at the time, but more so as time went on, is Maggie and Negan's interaction. The interaction itself is great, but the placement of it causes issues later on. There's a reason it was their ending in the comics, because, you know, it caps off Maggie's okay with him being alive because he's being punished. But having it done so early and then Maggie coming back years later just to retread, you know, old grounds again and then going into Dead City, it's a lot of the same, which does cause an issue. So I had to knock it down a few patches, but the stuff with Rick is absolutely perfect. I love the cameos from, you know, Shane, Herschel, Sasha's a bit of a weird one. In my opinion, it should have been Glenn. A lot of people say like Carl or Lori or someone, but that wouldn't make sense with what the episode was going for. You know, the whole looking for my family. If he saw Carl, then, you know, he found his family. He can give in to death, but it should have been Glenn. Unfortunately, I don't think Stephen Yum wanted to come back, so it was Sasha, which I guess works, as she, you know, kind of sacrificed herself, which I guess is what Rick is doing as well. Actually, you know, I take it back, it does work. But the ending with Rick on the bridge has become so iconic, and for the past 6 years, we've all just been asking, you know, Where's Rick? And it's crazy that we're gonna get our answer soon. The ending with him being taken away in the helicopter just sets up so much mystery and so much intrigue, you know, it just gets me so excited every time I rewatch it for the new series. So yeah, that was number 5. Now at number 4, we have season 5, episode 3, 4 walls and a roof. This episode is the finale of the Hunter's arc, and holy shit, what a finale it was. Starting off with Bob getting his leg eaten, the iconic tainted meat line, the fear portrayed by the entire crew stuck in this little church as there's an enemy outside. It's just absolutely wild. The only thing I wish they did different was in the comics, when they go out to get Bob as he's left out by the hunters, Glenn is shot in the leg, which really adds to the holy shit, like we're being hunted, aspect of it. Maybe not necessarily had to be Glenn, but I think somebody should have been shot out there. But besides that, everything else is absolutely perfect. And I actually don't mind the change from the comics with the actual massacre itself. In the comics, they basically, torture these people all night long before finally killing them, which is like really brutal. But at the time, the comic group kind of has gone through even more brutal stuff. So them embracing, their animalistic side and really, taking their time with it fits more for that group. But this group, doing it as an us or them, sort of thing. And it doesn't make our heroes, look like villains as much as it does in the comics. But yeah, a pretty much perfect finale for a perfect story arc. Now coming in at number 3, we have Season 1, Episode 1, Days Gone By. Just because it's old doesn't mean it should be slept on. This episode is the perfect premiere for pretty much any TV show ever. It introduces the protagonist as a family man with a mission, something the audience can immediately get on board with. An otherworldly threat that is hard to even comprehend. It's the perfect setup, and by itself is almost the perfect zombie movie, it being an extended episode. It's just such an incredible high for the series right off the bat. It's no wonder it became the juggernaut that it is. What is there to even really say about this episode that hasn't already been said, The biggest standout is probably Morgan as a character, which is funny because, later on in the series, going into Fear, I can't stand Morgan. He is written absolutely horribly. But in this first episode, there's a reason he was immediately a fan favorite and everyone wanted him back. His single episode story arc is pretty much perfect, but it doesn't have a bow tied on it, with him not actually being able to put down his wife and having, talked about going out to Atlanta and eventually meeting Rick. The threads were dangling, but for that single episode, it is done so well. And it's something I think, later seasons of the show really struggle with, is to have these, single episode or, few episode characters that really pack a punch. But damn, did Morgan pack that punch in the first episode. And I hope Lenny James is still proud of his performance to this day in that episode. It is just fantastic. Now at number 2, we have Too Far Gone. Oh man, besides the number 1 spot, this is my second most rewatched episode ever. It is just off the charts. The build up to the actual battle at the end is just so anxiety inducing. And you can just feel the desperation in Rick's voice for every word that comes out when he's talking to the governor. And at this point, the governor is just so stone cold that we know as the audience, this is only going one way. But the show still teases you and, pulls on your emotions to make you want them to, find a way to live together. And that itself probably would have been an interesting story arc, but the way it goes and the fallout of it and what it propels our group into just cannot be understated how big of a deal this episode is. And my favorite little Easter egg is that it's season 4, episode 8, and this event in the comics happens in issue 48. It's just a fun little, tie-in. Another thing I really love is how even though it's coming, it still comes out of nowhere. A lot of these prison storylines are still going right up until the first tank shot is shot. Rick and Daryl are investigating with Tyrese the rat being ripped apart and, the killing of Karen and David. It lures you into a false sense of security, even though, the governor is about to roll up in a tank. It's crazy. The battle itself is portrayed as a really devastating thing, which is what I think the show needed the most. And they should have taken notes on it later on in season 8 and made the battles feel more emotional rather than, a triumphant thing to be rolling up on people, shooting them down, even though they are bad guys. But if you're going with the story arc of trying to reunite these people later, maybe maybe not the best idea to, you know, just roll up and start spraying bullets and, you know, Daryl, you know, blowing up the sanctuary and killing all those people, but that's besides the point. Too Far Gone is another episode that just perfectly ends a story arc and sets up the next one, and it can't be understated how amazing this episode actually is. And moving on to our number one spot, I don't care if it's predictable, it deserves it. It is season 5, episode 1, No Sanctuary. Just like the pilot, I mean, what can be said about this episode that hasn't already been said? This is Carol at her all-time most badass, single-handedly taking out a compound of cannibals. Realistically, like, it's absolutely bonkers. She does it with a straight face while picking off, you know, the termites one by one. And the show doesn't shy away from the violence of this episode at all. My God, that intro with the trough and, you know, the throat slitting, I think should be up there with, you know, the Glenn death for most, like, gruesome deaths in the show. The chaos and the panic that the show is able to convey through, you know, just the use of sound, smoke, it's just absolutely amazing. Every character is written to their absolute peak potential, you know? Rick is, you know, go, go, go. We need to go back. We need to take him off. You know, the others who have had a little more of an easier time getting there, like, you know, Rosita, Glenn, you know, they're like, no, hell no, let's just get away from it. But the people like Rick and Daryl, who have had to fight their way to Terminus, are ready to go back and pick him off. But it all comes together in the end as the group is able to escape with no deaths and are reunited with not only Carol and Tyrese, but baby Judith as well. It ends with an amazing shot setting up the group wandering out into the wilderness. You know, the world is their oyster, they're all together and they're powerful. And the final shot with Rick crossing out the sign for No Sanctuary is just, you know, the absolute cherry on top. That is the perfect episode of The Walking Dead, without a doubt. So yeah, folks, that was my list of the top 10 episodes of The Walking Dead mainline TV series. Please leave your list below. I would love to know how yours differentiate, or, you know, call me an idiot in the comments, say I'm wrong. You know, you do you. But yeah, feel free to subscribe if you like the video, and I hope to have a lot more videos coming soon now that I'm all moved in and set up. So thanks for watching.